There is a moment in every person's life when they realize that everything they've been taught about power is wrong. For most, this moment arrives too late. They have already spent decades speaking, explaining, defending, justifying, and performing for an audience that was never truly listening. But there exists a different way, one that has been practiced for centuries by those who understood something fundamental about human nature, that silence is not the absence of power, but its purest form. In the year 1643, a samurai named Miyamoto Musashi sat in a cave on the island of Ganryu, awaiting a duel with a younger, faster opponent named Sasaki Kojiro. For hours before the confrontation, Musashi did not speak. He did not rehearse his movements. He did not visualize victory or recite affirmations to calm his nerves. He simply sat in silence, breathing, present. When the moment came to fight, Musashi moved with such economy and precision that the duel lasted mere seconds. His opponent never saw the strike coming. Afterward, when asked by his students how he had maintained such perfect clarity, Musashi said nothing. He simply smiled and returned to silence. This was not evasion, this was mastery. The modern world has become obsessed with visibility. We are told that if we do not speak, we do not exist. If we do not share our thoughts, our struggles, our opinions, our journey, then somehow we have failed to make an impact. Social media has weaponized this assumption. Every platform is designed to extract words from us, to transform our interior lives into public performance, to measure our worth by how much noise we generate. And in doing this, we have lost something ancient and irreplaceable, the understanding that true power moves silently. Chapter 1: The Architecture of Noise. Consider a man named Thomas. He worked in a corporate office where visibility meant everything. Every meeting required him to speak. Every email chain demanded his contribution. Every collaborative project necessitated that he voice his ideas, his concerns, his updates. Thomas had been trained since childhood to believe that silence was passive, that it indicated weakness, that it meant he did not care. So he spoke constantly. He filled meetings with words. He sent emails clarifying his previous emails. He made sure everyone knew what he was thinking at every moment. And yet, despite all this noise, he felt increasingly powerless. His ideas were forgotten. His voice was drowned out. His presence meant nothing. This paradox is built into the structure of modern communication. The more we speak, the less we are heard. The more we explain, the less we are understood. The more we perform, the less we are seen. This is not opinion. This is observable human psychology. When a person speaks constantly, their words lose weight. Each utterance dilutes the others. They become background noise, ambient sound, something to be tuned out rather than attended to. The person who speaks least in a room becomes the person everyone listens to most carefully, because their words have accumulated a kind of rarity value. They have not been devalued through overuse. The ancient Zen masters understood this principle deeply. In Zen monasteries, silence was not simply a rule, it was a teaching method. Monks would spend hours in silent meditation, then days in silent practice. And when a master finally spoke, every word carried the weight of that accumulated silence behind it. A single phrase could reshape a student's understanding of reality. This was not magic, this was communication architecture. The silence was not empty, it was pregnant with attention, with presence, with the capacity to receive and truly hear. Chapter 2: The Practice of Restraint. There exists a Japanese concept called ma, the space between things. It refers not to emptiness, but to the meaningful void, the pause that gives shape to sound, the white space that makes black visible. In traditional Japanese aesthetics, ma is considered more important than the forms themselves. A musician who understands Ma does not play more notes, they play fewer notes, but with such precise spacing that each note becomes luminous. A painter who understands Ma leaves vast areas of canvas empty, and this emptiness becomes the most powerful element of the composition. A speaker who understands Ma uses silence strategically, allowing each word to land with force. Thomas began to experiment with this principle, though he did not know its name. He made a simple rule for himself. In every meeting, he would speak no more than 3 times. This was difficult. His instinct was to fill silence, to demonstrate his engagement, to prove his value through constant contribution. But he held to this discipline. In his first meeting with this new constraint, he listened instead of spoke. He observed the dynamics in the room. He noticed things he had never seen before because he had always been too busy formulating his response. He saw which colleagues actually listened and which merely waited for their turn. He saw which arguments were sound and which were merely loud. When he finally spoke, he spoke once, a single sentence that addressed the core issue everyone had been circling around. The room went quiet. His boss made a note. He had said less and been heard more. Over weeks, this practice deepened. Thomas began to notice that his relationships changed when he stopped filling them with constant communication. His wife said that conversations felt richer when he was not always explaining himself. His colleagues began to ask for his opinion specifically, rather than being overwhelmed by unsolicited advice. His presence began to feel different, not withdrawn or cold, but concentrated, like the difference between a scattered light and a laser beam. He had discovered what the samurai knew, that restraint of speech is not a limitation, it is a refinement. It is power taken to its purest form. Chapter 3. The observation before action. There is a discipline within samurai training called zanshin, the awareness that remains after action. But before zanshin comes another principle, one that is rarely discussed in the West: kan, the art of seeing without judgment. In traditional Zen training, students would spend months simply observing the master at work, not attempting to replicate the movements, but absorbing the underlying principles through pure observation. They would watch in silence. They would not ask questions. They would simply witness. This was understood as a legitimate and essential form of learning, perhaps more important than instruction. The modern tendency is to mistake silence for inaction. If you are not speaking, you are assumed to be passive. If you are not performing, you are assumed to be absent. This is a dangerous misunderstanding. The person who is silent may be the most active of all, not in noise or visible movement, but in attention, in discernment, in the process of truly seeing what is actually occurring beneath the surface of things. Silence is a form of intense action. It is the action of receiving, of absorbing, of taking in information that speaks itself only to those who have stopped talking long enough to listen. Thomas's greatest transformation came when he understood this distinction. He realized that his constant speaking had been a defense mechanism, a way to avoid truly seeing his own life. By filling every space with words, he had never had to face the silence in which truth lives. When he finally stopped speaking long enough to listen, not just to others, but to the deeper currents of his own experience, he began to see clearly what needed to change. His job was draining him. His relationships were surface level because he used conversation to avoid intimacy. His sense of purpose had been lost beneath years of performance. None of this would have become visible had he continued to generate noise. The silence showed him everything. Chapter 4. The Power of Non-Participation. There is a Japanese word, kenkyo, which translates as humility, but its deeper meaning is something closer to strategic invisibility. It does not mean weakness or lack of confidence. Rather, it describes the choice to withdraw from unnecessary competition, to refuse to participate in displays of ego, to remain deliberately outside the fray of attention-seeking. Samurai warriors understood that many battles are won not by those who fight hardest, but by those who understand when not to fight at all. A warrior who could resist the provocation to engage, who could watch others exhaust themselves while maintaining their own energy and clarity, had already achieved victory before any swords were drawn. In modern life, there is constant pressure to participate in status games. Every conversation is a potential arena. Every interaction becomes a moment to establish dominance or prove your worth. The person who can resist this pressure, who can watch these games unfold without being pulled into them, has achieved a rare form of freedom. This person does not remain silent from fear or insecurity. They remain silent from discernment. They have understood that most of what demands their voice does not deserve it. Most of the status competitions unfolding around them are beneath their attention. Most of the arguments that seem urgent are actually empty. And by refusing to participate, they preserve something precious: their presence, their energy, their clarity. Thomas discovered this when a reorganization swept through his company. Old hierarchies were challenged. New leaders demanded their time be recognized. Colleagues he had worked with for years suddenly became competitors, speaking loudly about their achievements, undermining others to advance themselves. Thomas watched this unfold with a strange calm. He did not defend himself against the criticism. He did not argue for his position. He simply did his work well and remained silent. When the dust settled, he had been overlooked in the initial promotions, but he also had not exhausted himself in the conflict. More importantly, he had preserved his integrity. He had not become like the others. He had remained himself. And in the following year, when calmer heads prevailed, he was one of the few people who had not damaged their reputation in the chaos. His silence had protected him in ways that speaking never could have. Chapter 5. The Discipline of Listening. There is a Zen teaching that goes like this: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But there is a hidden part of this teaching that is often overlooked. The student must be silent enough to recognize the teacher when they arrive. The teacher might appear as a person, but just as often they appear as an experience, a failure, a moment of confusion, a small detail you notice in passing. Most people miss these teachings entirely because they are too busy talking, too busy defending their current understanding, too busy performing their version of themselves to the world. They are not quiet enough to receive what is trying to reach them. The ancient samurai understood that listening was not a passive activity. It was the highest form of active learning. A samurai would observe how water moves around obstacles, how bamboo bends in wind without breaking, how silence falls after a gong is struck. These observations were not merely aesthetic. They were teachings about how to move through the world, how to adapt without losing integrity, how to let noise pass without being disturbed by it. All of this required sustained attention, which requires silence. It is nearly impossible to truly listen when you are generating words. Listening is a discipline. It is a practice. It is something that must be cultivated deliberately. Thomas began to practice genuine listening. Not the fake kind where you wait for your turn to speak while the other person is talking, but real listening, where you attempt to understand what is being said beneath the words being said. This practice changed how he understood almost everything. He discovered that most people do not want to be responded to or corrected or advised. They want to be heard. They want to know that someone is genuinely attending to their experience. When Thomas listened in this way, without defending, without explaining, without offering solutions, something shifted in his relationships. People began to trust him. They sought him out specifically because he was someone who truly heard them. In a world of constant noise, this had become an almost supernatural gift. It was not supernatural at all. It was simply the result of disciplined silence. Chapter 6. The Transformation. After 6 months of this practice, Thomas would have been difficult to recognize to someone who had known him only in the early days. He spoke less, but when he spoke, people listened carefully. He participated in fewer meetings, but his contributions were considered essential. He made fewer friends through constant social performance, but the relationships he did maintain had become deeply real. Most importantly, he had discovered something about himself that he had lost, a sense of interior presence, a connection to his own depth that had been buried beneath years of external noise. The transformation was not the result of any dramatic moment or sudden insight. It was the result of a simple, sustained discipline, the choice to be silent when he wanted to speak, to listen when he wanted to perform, to observe when he wanted to act. This discipline is available to everyone. It costs nothing. It requires no special equipment or circumstances. It requires only the willingness to resist the constant pressure to generate noise, to prove yourself, to defend your position, to perform for an audience. It requires the understanding that your true power lies not in how much you say, but in how carefully you choose what to say and when to say nothing at all. The samurai warriors who achieved mastery were not those who spoke most eloquently or fought most aggressively. They were those who understood the profound power of restraint. They understood that a sword kept in its sheath is more intimidating than one constantly swung in the air. They understood that the threat of action carries more weight than constant action itself. They understood that silence is not weakness, but concentration, not absence, but presence so refined that it becomes almost invisible. This understanding is not locked away in ancient history. It is available to anyone willing to practice it. It is available to you right now, in this moment, in the choice between speaking and listening, between noise and silence, between the constant performance and the quiet presence of someone who has finally stopped trying to prove they exist. Epilogue: The Return to Silence. There is a final teaching from the Zen tradition. A student asked the master, "What is the highest truth?" The master was silent for a long time. The student waited. Eventually, the student asked again, "Master, why do you not answer?" And the master said, "I have already answered you." The student had not understood then that the silence itself was the teaching. This is the deepest level of the practice, understanding that sometimes what you do not say contains more truth than anything you could possibly speak. As you move forward from this moment, you have a choice. You can return to the constant generation of noise, to the performance and the explanation and the endless justification of your existence, or you can practice the discipline of silence. You can choose to speak less. You can choose to listen more carefully. You can choose to observe before acting. You can choose to remain outside of competitions that do not serve you. And in making these choices, repeatedly, day after day, you will discover something that has always been present, but that you could never have heard while you were speaking: your own voice. Not the voice that performs and defends and explains, but the voice that knows, that understands, that sees clearly. That voice speaks only in silence, and it is the most powerful voice you will ever have.